Good afternoon, guys. I'm Chris, and welcome back to this Wednesday's episode of Rift Amps. Today is Saturday, and the reason I'm not actually meant to be in doing amp work. I'm actually in doing carrying on with the build of the limited slit diff for the Mazda. But I've hit a bit of a brick wall with that. So I thought while I'm here and the workshop's warm, we'll carry on with the matamp, because I had a bit of a spark in the old noggin last night. And do you remember how I was saying, and this is before Sunday's video comes out, that I'm recording this, but by the time this comes out, you would have seen Sunday's video. But do you remember how I was saying, if something doesn't make sense, there's 3 reasons for that. One of which is you don't have all the information. Number 2 is you have the incorrect information. Or number 3 is you've made an incorrect assumption. So I'm just thinking and going back to the basics and thinking, right, well, where are we with this? What do we actually know? And what assumptions have I made about it? You know, because let's not throw anything off the table. We had a DC heater failure. So the entire circuit failed. So that's had a full rebuild. We had the master volume pot fail. And we had this intense hum appear all at the same time. And remember, I found that ghost voltage, which I did say in Sunday's video, whenever you're watching this or whatever, that it might be a red herring. Well, it is. It is a red herring. Nothing to worry about. The mistake I've made, and I'll always put my hands up when I make a mistake, is that I'm still thinking of this as a standard Marshall or Fender style reverb circuit. That's what my brain is thinking, even though I know full well it's not, and it's a transformerless setup. And so that cap, that one there, every capacitor must be referenced to ground in a circuit, okay, in some way. Now, without the reverb tank connected, that capacitor has no ground, right? And it's referenced to ground through the input coil on the tank and then comes back. So that's how that cap gets its ground. Without the tank connected, it's floating. So of course there's a weird ghost voltage going on. So it is a red herring. It is nothing to worry about, but when you're not thinking straight and your mind's not in the right place, and the assumption I made there in my head subconsciously was it's a transformerless, it works like a standard reverb circuit, as most of us are used to. Transformerless reverb circuits are few and far between. You rarely get them in the workshop, and when you're doing 2 or 3 different things at the same time, it's very easy to make that incorrect assumption. You hold your hands up, you say whoop, and you use it as a learning opportunity. So it is a red herring. We can ignore most of that video. Right, anyway. So I've gone back to this thing. Do you remember how I said, well, that hum, if I remove the effects loop from circuit entirely and went straight from the master volume pot with shielded cable to the phase inverter input, the hum disappeared. Do you remember that? Cool. Well, what I thought I'd do is rewire it again with proper shielded cable rather than using the pass-through. I've just done it with some switchcraft on the back here, just to rule out a little niggle that I had in my head. And I can confirm that it's made no difference. The hum is still there. So even with shielded cable, in the more traditional sense, compared to how Matamp had done it, it's still noisy. Now, why is that? Why would that be? Why would shielded cable be picking up noise when the shields are grounded at one end, as it should be? Well, the easiest thing to think is, well, maybe there is a fault and there's something weird going on. Let's think with a different part of our brain. Let's go left-brained a little bit and think, well, maybe that's not where the noise is in the circuit at all, and the assumption we made based on the data we've gathered so far is that is where the noise is, right? But maybe it's not. I've also, the two filter caps came in for the preamp B+5. One of them measured fine, one of the old ones. The other one measured about half its value compared to what it should be. It's a 220 microfarad caps, and they measure, well, that one measured around 130, 135, depending which tester you measure on. So that cap was starting to fail. Now, it's interesting because they normally go higher in capacitance when they start to leak. Well, that's not necessarily true. That's just how the meter reads them, because it's starting to act more like a resistor. Anyway, so the new caps are in. The diode itself was fine. Didn't have to replace that. Tested bang on. I mean, it's a 1 kilovolt 3 amp diode, and it's in nowhere near that level of abuse in this circuit. Nowhere near its limit. So, and it tests fine compared to a new one. So the original one's gone back in. Other thing I did, a mistake I made, again, put my hand up, is when I drew the schematic out, I did make a couple of mistakes on the schematic. Not that it's affected what I'm doing, but I realised I hadn't drawn in, where's my pointer? There's a resistor here, a 220k, and that wasn't on my schematic that I'd drawn out either by hand or on the computer. So I needed to work out where that goes. That's the grid leak for the reverb input. It's connected across to the input there. That wasn't in circuit. And the other mistake I'd made, again, was the cathode resistor for the EL84, the reverb driver, is actually bypassed by this electrolytic. I'd missed that one off as well. So I've updated my schematic, put those in, and that's fine. And that's cool. So, what assumptions have I made with this amp since it came into me before Christmas? Well, in April 2024, this amp was in. Some of you may remember for various work. And we discovered that it had been built with the bias circuit for EL34s, even though it's a 6v6 amp. And once we'd worked all that out and been through that process with it, we converted it to 6v6 bias, rebuilt the bias supply, all that stuff, and had it all up and working. So, about 18 months ago, we did the bias supply. So, okay, keep that in mind. Some of you have probably already worked this one out, but I'm thinking to myself, right, let's say the noise is not coming from the area of the circuit that we think it is. What do we know about guitar amplifiers? Where is noise and buzz often injected directly into a point where it's really aggressive and noticeable? Well, the grids, the input grids. If you inject the noise into the input grid, the valve is going to go, wow, here's a noise, let's amplify it, right? So I thought what I'd do is I'd just scope out the input grids of the output valves. Why, I hear you ask? Well, why not? Let's just go ahead, gather that data, see if there's anything there that makes sense, that doesn't make sense. You know, is everything operating correctly, or do we find something that makes us question the operating conditions of the amp? Well, what I thought I'd do is scope the bias supply voltage to the grids of the output valves. Bearing in mind the filter caps were done just 18 months ago, or the bias filter caps. And I'll bring you down here and I'll zoom you in on the scope. Now, that's what we've got at the moment. Okay. Now, sorry about the wonky angle, I'm not going to fix it. What I've done is I have added an extra cap in the chassis from the input grid of, we'll call that V6 to ground. I'm now going to remove it from circuit. I've also got a microphone on the speaker, and we're looking at the purple trace here. Add the cap back in. Buzz reduces, take it out. Add it back in. Oh dear, oh dear. A part or parts that I fitted 18 months ago have failed. It's as simple as that. The assumption I made was that those parts were still good. It didn't cross my mind that they could have failed again because, you know, they're new and I'm looking elsewhere in the circuit. So again, this highlights the point that I love to make. If something doesn't make sense, more often than not, it's because you've made an incorrect assumption. So don't be too humble, well, don't be too proud, sorry. Be humble and go back and double check what's going on. So what I'm going to do on this, now there's only 12 months on parts, but I think that's a little bit, yeah, especially for small value components, right? I can quite happily replace the 4 electrolytics in the bias supply and not charge the customer for that, nor am I going to charge him for any diagnosis time for the hum in the amplifier. He will pay diagnosis time for the DC heaters and the master volume pot because they are new issues and new things that I've had to diagnose and fix. So he's paying diagnosis and repair time on those. But I'm not going to charge him at all for the diagnosis and repair of that bias supply, which has clearly failed, even though on paper and by law, it's out of warranty. Just not going to do it. I think that's fair and reasonable. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to return everything else back to stock, double check everything's fine. I'm going to put the effects loop back to stock how matamp had it, as unorthodox as it was. It did work, so we'll put that back. And then once I'm happy that the amp is noise free, I mean, ideally the ripple on the scope should be 0. So we're going to try and get it as clean as possible, the bias voltage. And then we will go again from there. But yeah, isn't that fascinating? Isn't that interesting? I made an incorrect assumption, which happens. But you can either kick yourself for it or you can learn from it. That's diagnosis. That's working stuff out. Now, what I think would be interesting is if another tech had this, would they have assumed that those caps were good? You never know. You know, they may well have assumed that they're original and therefore could be faulty. But my default position, I've done those recently, and therefore they can't be wrong. Which is partly where the struggle of this amp is. It's the, you know, the soft bit up here, not the hard facts in front of you. So yeah, anyway, I'm going to go ahead, replace those, and we will go again. Right, Q&A time. We haven't done this for ages, and I've got quite a few questions and comments to get through. Excuse me. I'm going to try and do these oldest to newest. So some of you have to think back to before Christmas to some of these comments. I'll try and explain which video these comments come from so you don't kind of get lost. Otherwise, it just feels like I'm talking away about any old random stuff for hours. What am I doing on the bench? Well, a couple of things. I have just finished drilling and punching the chassis for Neil's Americana LP build. So that's all done now. The only thing left to do on that is the board mount holes, but I can't do those until I make the new board up. It's getting a slightly revised board design compared to the current one or the old one. So I need to do that. Then I can do the holes in the board. And then I can transfer those holes to this chassis. So but yeah, that's that. Still waiting on the transformers to come back from Demeter. They are doing some. They are cloning them for me or copying them because they're going to be doing all my transformers moving forward. We've talked about this before. Anyway, so that's that. And this is the board for the AL SIG that I'm currently building at the moment. So it's fully drilled, eyelets in, all swaged in, all the components on and populated, underboard connections done. So I'm now doing the flying leads and the overboard connections, and then I can put that to one side whilst I carry on with the chassis wiring. So that's kind of this morning's job, first thing Monday morning. Well, it's currently, it's about 10 past 10. All right, I've had my coffee, I've had a little bit of a sort out, and I'm raring to go. Last week, interesting one. First week back after the Christmas break. Didn't really feel like I got back into the swing of things, you know. It was a slow start. But now I feel like I'm really back into it, firing on all 4 cylinders. Or 4, or 6, or 8, whatever you want to say. Firing on all cylinders. We'll call it that. So, we'll start with regular commenter, Catmandoodoo. Welcome back, mate. Who said, Happy Christmas, everybody. Thank you for a year of knowledge and entertainment. Well, as always, you are more than welcome. One question. In the new year, my father-in-law and I are building a new cab for my #1 amplifier. For shielding, can we use the copper tape I've used in guitars in place of the alley tape that you use? Logic dictates that it should be fine, but wanted to double check. Yes, of course you can. The only thing I wouldn't recommend, or I've had very little success with, is the conductive paint that you get for cavities in guitar. We did try it on the roof of a cabinet once, and it worked a little bit. There was some hum rejection, but not loads. You know, alley tape, copper tape is just a much better solution, at least for cabinets, as far as I've, you know, in all the years I've been doing this. It works, why mess with it, right? So yeah, but great question. Yeah, carry on, use the copper tape, I'm sure it'll be fine. This dude says, you really love yourself, huh? All in capital letters. Yes, mate, I am the vainest bloke you'll ever meet, you know, with my £100 haircut. Definitely not wearing the same clothes every day. You know, I'm always in designer gear, drive flash cars. I love myself. Also, the irony of this comment is not lost on me, coming from somebody with the handle, me first. I need 6 inches of white. So we'll give it 6.5, shall we, just in case. Anders says, I really enjoy your clips. It calms me to see genuine craftsmanship in the works. Well, thank you, mate. And I think you're a new commenter to the channel. He says, great 5E3 build, shielded cable from the inputs, and interesting with the different 5Y3 is giving different B+ voltages. Yeah, the old ones do give a lower voltage. You said that the TAD power transformer has enough current to run 6L6s. It does, both heater and B+. If the owner subbed a 5Y3 with a GZ34 and got 40 to 50 volts higher B+ voltages when using 6L6s, is the 270 ohm cathode bias resistor rated high enough for use with 6L6s with the GZ34? How large is the output transformer? Blah, blah, blah. So if you want to run 6L6s, then you need to bias the amplifier appropriately to do so. A 270 ohm resistor will probably run 6L6s too cool, so you will need to drop it. From memory, if you drop it down to roughly 180, will give you a more appropriate bias or operating conditions for 6L6s with a GZ34. Using that transformer, you might, if you want to push it even further, drop down to 150. That's the next D12 value down. Joule's law will tell you that 5 watts is probably not enough for 6L6s. So I think if you calculate it and then double rate, you'd need at least a 7 watt. So, you know, a 10 watt resistor is going to be the headroom that you would want in there. He also says, I have a question regarding the size of the coupling caps in a 5E3. The previous Fender model, the 5D3, had 47 nanofarad caps in the preamp and output stage instead of the 100 nanofarad in the 5E3. The 5E3 is often quoted as having tons of bass in the signal. Would a 5E3 with 47 nanofarad coupling caps be sacrilege? No, absolutely not. You can voice the amplifier whichever way you want. Some people go, put 22s in there, or even 10s. You voice the amplifier whichever way you want it to be. If you're going for a vintage sound and you want to, you know, actually replicate a 5E3 with all of its downfalls as well, use the original values. But you change the size of those caps to whatever you feel sounds best to your ears. 5E3s are great for learning how the different value caps change the sound, feel and response of an amplifier. And when you're doing those tests, check both clean and in overdriven modes, right? What I say to people, if you are going to do that, start at the back end of the circuit, so the coupling caps to the output valves, and work your way towards the preamp, changing as you go. It's a great thing to do. Now, there's only 5 caps in a 5E3, 4 100 nanofarads and 122, and the 22 is the phase inverter coupling. Mess around with that one. That's a great one to mess around with, and I say this a lot. See what that does. You know, do you like the tone, feel and response change when you increase the value of that cap and also when you decrease it? But you can do whatever you like. I mean, it also comes down to which speaker you fit. So, you know, voice the amp to work with the speaker. I always say a speaker is like a master EQ filter on when you're in the recording studio. So everything is going through that EQ filter at the very end. So, you know, if you start with that and work and voice everything to work with that speaker, you often get a much better result. Where's Chilton? Regular commenter. I do that every time. Welcome back, mate. Says, I absolutely love your attention to detail on these amps. Yep, well, that's what people pay me for. Oh, that sounds really big-headed, doesn't it? But, you know, there is some element to truth in that. You know, I don't rush this stuff. You know, I take my time over the builds because I care. I also really like the drivers you were using on the pots and switches when you were installing the faceplates. What are those? They are... so I have 4 main sizes. And they're really just the sizes that get used every day. So I buy a lot of stuff from RS here in the UK. I've got an account with them. It's just easy for me to order stuff. So I have an 8mm and a 10mm. And for small nuts and switches, I have a 1/2 inch, which is for most, you know, like switchcraft sockets and stuff like that. And then I also have a 14mm for my big switches. That one is a different brand. That's a Baco, don't know. But they're great. Just, you know, slightly long, medium length nut drivers, whatever. They're just useful to have. It saves me swapping sockets around and losing stuff. And then I also have just a selection of sockets on bits and pieces like that. So yeah, it's easy. But yeah, they're great and they work great and they're easy to grab. I don't end up messing around with stuff. 6 inches of blue. Hoffman Guitars says, I already had respect, Chris, but seeing another craftsman who clocks their visible screws, perfection. Now, I shouldn't really say this, mate, but I do a number of things so I know if someone else has been inside the amp. and I do different things on different amps, right? So one thing I do on some models is clock the screws, and I showed that on the Ainsley amp, right? But I didn't show you everything I do. On different amps, I do different things. So that way, if they ever come back in, someone says, you know, it's you know, whatever, I can look at it and I can immediately know if I was the last person to work on that amp. Very consistent like that. But yeah, it's not just an aesthetic thing. It's just a way of knowing if someone else has been fiddling where they shouldn't be. Anyway, the only thing which would make it better is slot head screws. No, absolutely not. I do love a slot head screw, but not on a guitar amp. Posi all the way. Pff, bang, done. Andy Yates says, I found your channel this year like some others. I appreciate how much I learn as I watch and just enjoy the content. You have a different style from Brad's Guitar Garage or Psionic, so it's really cool to get your perspective, but all three of you really focus on quality. Yeah, so regular viewers of the channel will know I do this channel differently to all the other amp techs. They're all doing the repair stuff, you know, and they get quite technical with it, and each episode is kind of focused on one particular amp, or if it's a series on an amp, one particular problem. Why would I try and do the same thing? Why would I try and compete? I do it differently. I do it more of a vlog style, show off what I get up to each week, the stuff that comes through the door, a warts and all perspective on what it's like running a business like this in the modern age. And, you know, it gives everyone something different. It's a bit different. It doesn't do huge numbers, but it doesn't really need to. It goes well and above what I ever dreamed it would do in terms of advertising the business and showing off what I do. It's been a positive thing for the business, and I really enjoy making the videos. I've got really comfortable talking to camera, making the content, showing off what I do, whether I have a success or a failure, or, you know, or whatever it is. I just enjoy doing it. It's great fun. So there's a lot of upsides to, you know, spending your days working on stuff, talking to camera, showing off what you're doing, what you're doing. Because, you know, not everything goes swimming perfectly well all the time. It'd be very easy for me to create content that only shows how amazing I am and how easy the job is and how perfect. But that's not life. That's not, you know, the reality of running a business. There are a lot of things that go wrong all the time, and I feel it's actually quite important to, you know, to show that stuff off and say, look, this is how tricky it is sometimes. You know, this is what happens. You know, sometimes I get electric shocks. Sometimes, you know, I just struggle to get a clean solder joint sometimes and have to redo it 3 or 4 times because whatever, you know, stuff happens. And I like to show that off as well as the good side. So I really appreciate that, Andy. Anyway. He says, I got myself confused about plate dissipation versus output power over the weekend while looking at an amp with two 6550s. It's advertised as 120 watts. Ah, right, yes. So there's actually, this reminds me of something that I saw the other day on the beautiful place that is Facebook groups for amp repair. Is that you've got output power in watts, you've got plate dissipation in watts, but you've also got power consumption in watts. So the amount of power the amp pulls from the wall and then converts that into both heat and output power in watts, right? And one guy was confused because he bought I can't remember what it was, but let's say it's a 30 watt amp. But on the back, next to the mains input, the power socket, it was saying, you know, it was a 120 watt amp or 150 watt amp or whatever. And he was confused as to, I thought it was only a 30 watt amp. Yeah, but that's the amount of power it consumes, not the amount of power it puts out, which is stated elsewhere. So there you go. Yeah, you have to be careful. Yeah, it's a similar thing to that. People who get both resistance and impedance confused. They're both measured in ohms, but they mean different things, especially when it comes to speakers, right? So it can be confusing. So And sometimes, I mean, I know this stuff, so sometimes I do that whole, oh, what an idiot. But actually, I get it. It can be confusing. You can get yourself turned around. Sometimes it happens to me. Michael Smith, again, a regular commenter, says, I didn't realise that the later super reverbs, we're on to my 200 quid silver panel super reverb now. I didn't realise later super reverbs added a mid control on the normal channel. The earlier ones just had treble and bass. I have a 69 super reverb, but rarely use the normal channel. I can't remember when they added them. I'll be able to look it up, and I'll put it on the screen now, or when they started to appear. But yeah, they did. The later ones did. I'm sure it was actually earlier. Top of my head says it was earlier than I thought it was. Oh, Tremolo the cat. What's she doing? Anyway, sorry. Yeah. Now, he also says there's no choke in that amp. Is that because of the ultralinear circuit? Yes, exactly that. The ultralinear amps, for the pedants out there, distributed load, do not have a choke. Absolutely correct. So, yeah, that's exactly it. 7 inches of brown. Right. Ali Second Male says, what is the purpose of the disc capacitors that appear to be across the diodes in the rectifier circuit? It's noise suppression. So when diodes are switching, they make a noise. Sometimes that noise can be quite noisy and can work its way into the audio path. So adding some caps across suppresses that noise. It's not always necessary. It just depends on the design of the amplifier, bits and pieces like that. But that's all they are. It's just noise suppression, and they work quite well. 6 inches of yellow, 6 inches of brown. Taz Taylor Taz says, Chris, what is the stereo system on the shelf behind you? That is a cheap Chinese system that I bought years and years and years ago because it had a built-in iPod dock back when people were actually using iPods, right? But it was the Fat Man iTube, and it sounds pretty decent. I mean, I'm not that fussed about hi-fi stuff, to be honest. It works fine. It sounds fine. I mean, it's got a really cheap set of bookshelf speakers attached to it. It's just so I've got something here. I did have an old valve unit there, which I've still got out the back, actually. Maybe I'll dig that out, but that was only a monoblock, where this is stereo. So, and for all of that smooth jazz that I listen to, I do want a stereo setup. So that's all it is, just a cheap system. Sounds all right, you know. I don't hate it, so it will continue being used. On my Super Reverb, Faultless Guitars and Amps says, any sign of the green ooze corrosion on the wiring? Not that I've seen so far, although I will admit I haven't done a super in-depth inspection of all the wiring, but I will. But no, from what I've seen so far, we are all good. If we do discover some of that, obviously it will get replaced. But no, I mean, the thing with that amp, the inside was in pretty good condition. It was just the outside. So I'm not too overly concerned, yellow to the right. But yeah, as I said, yeah, nothing so far, which is a good thing. I can't wait to get stuck on with that. But next time I go up to my fabricator to get some chassis welded, I'll take that chassis up with me, because what he can do is he sends a lot of stuff to his nickel plating guy, and so we'll stick it in with that stuff, and it might not actually cost me any money if he sticks it in with a load of other stuff. So we'll see. That's the plan anyway. It might not work out like that. I might get stung with a big bill, but that's what I'm going to do with it. Danny DKNYC says, I know you're rebuilding everything on the Super Reverb, but wondering why you didn't just leave as much connected to the board as you could, like if you just disconnected the pots from the front of the chassis and left them all tied to the board, and on the back of the chassis you could have left in and just disconnected the transformers, power cord and tube sockets to minimise what you have to put back together. I'm thinking the reason you just cut the board was because you were keeping everything else and just replacing the board, question mark. But if you did do the other way, you didn't have to commit yourself until you took everything out and then inspected it. I don't know, it takes me a lot of time to put things together, so I think about what's involved, but you know for you it's a lot easier because you do it all the time, I guess. Okay. I understand what you're saying. Yes, I could have tried to remove everything in one go, but that amp is getting all new pots, all new valve sockets, a new board, new 3 boards actually, so all 3 boards being done. The only things inside the chassis that I will be keeping are possibly some of the wires, to be honest. Everything else is being refreshed and new. So that's why. But also, at some point, it would have had to be stripped down anyway. So why not have fun and do it on camera, right? Make a good video out of it. Everything needs to be inspected. So that's the reason why. 8 inches of yellow and 8 inches of blue. Well, the best things I did was put a bit of masking tape right in front of me on my window bars with inches on. It just means I can just measure stuff immediately, right in front of me. Did I say 8 inches? Yeah. And then I can just snip it. What I have is a piece of paper with all the wire measurements on for flying leads for all my amps. I need to make it digital, to be honest, but and they're all. I've always added at least half an inch onto them just to give me some leeway. But it means I don't waste a load of wire. I can cut them roughly to length, wire them all in. It kind of just speeds up production a little bit. And again, without wasting good cloth wire. Because this stuff is now costing me, in the spec that I order, I'm not sure what the exchange rate now is, but it's about... It's now crept over the €2 per metre mark for this stuff. Again, depending how much you buy, so I buy 30 metre rolls at a time. So this kind of size. On the yellows I buy more, and on the green I buy more, but on the other colours I just do 30 metre rolls. The next step up from that is it's annoying because they do a 50 metre roll and then they do 100, but they don't do a 25, they do a 30. So you can never quite get what you want, but this is the way it is. Anyway, yeah, so try not to waste it as much. You can buy cheaper stuff, but it's terrible. It's also not Roche, so I can't use it in my new builds. But yeah, quite happily pay for quality, but it's always that weird quantity thing where they never eat. Yeah. Anyway, it's the French. I blame them. Do you remember I had to get the blowtorch out on the Super Reverb to get that thing? Well, Jagstar, regular commenter, welcome back, mate, says that's the switch. Usually the dual light holder is loose and flopping around. Yeah, it is. Never seen one so stuck. I mean, it was in there, right? It was in there. I'm only about halfway through this video, but looking at the condition, I'd say the faceplates are in decent shape. Yeah, they really are, actually. And the inside of the chassis is not bad except the corners. If you can clean up the rust on the outside somewhat and seal it with a clear top coat, I think the chassis is recoverable. Loving having some extra content over the holidays. Give me something to do on breaks from redesigning my tube preamp project. I'd love to hear more about that, mate. If you've already told me, sorry. I get a lot of comments I do forget, but keep me updated. Keen to do that. The chassis is recoverable. As I said, we're going to get it acid dipped and replated. It just looks a little bit rough on the outside at the moment, but it's, as I said, it's just on that crossover point between surface rust and eating into the metal properly. So it should be recoverable. There might be a little bit of pitting, but it won't be too bad. It'll be fine. But to get it plated again will really set it off quite nicely. Dominic Johnson says, Happy New Year, Chris. Puzzle for you. I installed a Mojotone multi-tap VibroChamp output transformer in my vintage VibroChamp with the 8-ohm tap connected so I can play through larger 8-ohm speakers. Sounds great, but I'm getting a strange low volume brrr sound as the played note decays, more audible on the wound strings. Tried reversing the primary and secondary connection to no avail. Any advice? Yeah, check the ground connection, the common connection for the secondary side. Make sure it's got a really, really good, strong chassis connection. You would be surprised how difficult that is. Now, if it's on the Vibro Champ, I'm guessing it's an RCA socket, isn't it? Rather than a switchcraft, unless you've converted it. So just double check. I mean, even if it's if you've got a couple of ohms resistance between common and chassis, and don't just use the continuity checker, actually measure with DCR, a DCR meter, check. And you should have, ideally, no more than 0.1 ohms. And that'll just be, the meter struggling to read that low. If it reads anything more than half an ohm, then double check that ground connection. Poor ground connections cause all sorts of fun. So that would be the first point of call. You know my rule. Check you've got good power supply, check you've got good ground. The foundation of your house has to be strong to build everything else on top of it. If you don't, you get all sorts of problems. Jake asks a really, really good question. I don't recognise your handle, so you might be new here, so welcome. He says, Happy New Year, Chris. I have a question, if you have time, regarding the reliability of the matamp circuit board that uses turrets along with PCB traces. It looks like the turrets are soldered onto the PCB and not swaged. Have you seen reliability issues with this construction method? I worry that the connections may not be robust since they appear to depend on solder for both mechanical stability and electrical connection. On the other hand, swaging the turret onto the board might damage the PCB traces that connect to the turret as well, making the connection more difficult to solder. For those reasons, I have not attempted this kind of hybrid construction. Though being able to replace components from the top side is a great advantage over regular through-hole PCB construction. So they are both swaged and soldered. Now those the boards have PCB traces on both sides. The turret goes through and they're not heavily swayed, they're kind of lightly swaged. So there is some mechanical connection there, and then they are soldered in on the underside. I'm not sure if I've yet to put detailed photos of the underside of the boards, but if I haven't done, I will do so now. So it's actually the best of both worlds. To answer your question, have I seen reliability issues with this construction method? No, those things are rock solid stable. They're really, really good. I mean, it's those amps are pretty bomb-proof, right, in terms of their build construction. They're built really well. I mean, it's an interesting way of doing things. It's not something you see all the time, which I guess is why people, would question why it's done, but it does work. So it's one of the things that I really don't worry about. I don't have concerns about that. Whereas, my thoughts on turrets anyway. But at least those turrets have the slots on top, so you've got a nice, and when they're clocked properly, you've got a nice point for the component to sit into as well. Actually, I think my old Tektronix scope uses a similar method. I'll have to double check. Anyway, but no, to answer your question, no, I'm not worried. It works really well. And yeah, it actually pains me to admit, surprisingly easy to work on. Phantom Dave says, Happy New Year. And to you, mate. He says, will you do an episode or partial about the race car? So I do have a separate channel for my racing antics, which is 2RM Motorsport. So if you want to go over to that channel, I put my races up on there, some other bits and pieces as well. So if you're interested in more racing content that's more dedicated to racing, you can go over to that channel. It's not as active as this channel. I just put my races on. Sometimes I do some vloggy stuff, but it's more of a repository for my racing record, as it were. But if you want to go watch stuff, you can go over there and do so. In the bonus footage sections of the Riff channel, is where I put stuff that's not necessarily Rift related. So often it's race car stuff, because that's what I mess around with in my spare time, right? So I'm currently doing the diff build for the Mazda. I've got an engine build going on as well, although that's very slow progress. The BMW is having its engine swapped this month or next month. I can't remember when. It hasn't gone off yet. We're still waiting for it to go, me to take it over there. Mazda's pretty much all the Mazda needs now to be race ready is to go for chassis setup. It needs a general service, oil change, spark plugs, diff and gearbox oil. Oh no, gearbox oil's been done. Then it just needs to go for chassis setup, so corner weight and alignment. So that will be done on the Thursday before we go racing, so we'll leave it to the very last minute. And then that's ready to go. So that won't be done until Croft. I'm hoping that the BMW is done and ready, as in the engine swap is done and all the other bits needed to do it, because there is a test day at Silverstone at the end of February that ideally, if everything lines up, I'd like to go there and give the car a shakedown. Obviously Silverstone, my local circuit. Because there's some data I need to gather on that car. One, we need to check that it actually runs, and it runs well. But I need to do things like fuel consumption, brake wear, tyre wear, all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I'm hoping we'll get that. We'll be able to make that track day test. It's not a track day, sorry, it's a test day. It's an official test day, so you need a race licence. But I'm looking forward to that. That's the plan. So that leaves me, I think it's about 6-7 weeks for us to get that done. So, yeah. But that's it. If you want dedicated race car stuff, go to the 2RM channel. Or keep an eye out for bonus footage, which I do include in Rift content every now and again. 7 inches of red. 7 inches of red. Snip. Okay, clean cut. Right, Johan, who's clearly having a bad day, says on the last matamp video, the one about the ghost voltage, says, you can keep looking at it for hours and continue theorising, hypothesising and waffling. Just get the multimeter out and measure stuff. Have you heard of a continuity check? You must be new here, mate. Welcome. I do appreciate your comment. If you watch enough of my content, you will know full well that I love to gather data. I love to measure stuff like that. And in fact, if you watch that video, you can see I'm buzzing that amplifier out like no tomorrow. In fact, not only that, I actually drew the whole schematic out by hand. So, yeah, calm down. He also says, 42 minutes and 4 seconds, you're an amp company and you don't have filter caps on hand. Have you ordered replacements without checking the old ones? Well, I'll tell you a little secret, mate. A really smart business strategy is to invest loads of capital into every single component that you might ever need over your lifespan. So what you do is you go to your supplier and you order every capacitor in every voltage rating, in every capacitance rating, in every format, every size, every lead spacing. You know, so you chuck, I don't know, maybe 100 grand's worth of capital into all those components so you've got them on hand, rather than just letting your supplier stock them and order them overnight for a couple of quid extra. That's the smart thing to do, is to sit on that debt for years and years and years. I mean, that's my top tip for everyone. You know, don't be sensible with your money. Splash it all into parts that age over time. You know, those caps, I looked it up. The last time I sold a 220 microfarad 400 volt radial cap with that lead spacing was 2019. So, you know, clearly I sell them regularly, and it would have been worth me, you know, reordering those and stocking those for 6 years just in case I needed them, rather than paying the £2.45 postage to get them next day. So, but that's my smart tip for you, is waste all your capital, sit on the debt, just in case you need something at some point at any time. Rune Bivrin Yeah, Bivrin says, I'm thinking the ghost voltage on the cap is simply because with the reverb tank disconnected and the switch open, there's nothing connecting the negative end of the cap to anything. Left floating, it charges and discharges through the multimeter. When the anode voltage rises, the other end follows, but then goes to 0 as the cap charges. When the power turns off, both ends drop with the anode voltage, thus yielding a negative voltage reading until the cap has discharged again. You got it exactly right, Rune. As I said on earlier on in this video, yeah, you know, if a cap doesn't have a ground reference, it does all sorts of weird things. And that cap, unless the foot switch is shorting the signal to ground, it gets its ground reference through the reverb tank itself. So you are absolutely right. You got there. Well done, mate. Good job. It's nice to know that there are some people out there who have an ounce of common sense. So well done, mate. Good job. Hello, everyone. Right, this is the other matamp that's in at the shop at the moment, the GT100. The one that came in before Christmas for a number of jobs. First one is a service. Second one was, do you remember we had broken input jack that wasn't working, which we did swap out. What have I done with it? If you remember, it was broken. So we have swapped that out. So now I can turn this thing on and start doing some testing. So I've got it powered up on the bench now. It's been running for about 25 minutes. Currently, wall voltage today is 241 volts, pulling 665 milliamps out the wall, which equates to 136-ish watts. So what I'm doing now is, we found this schematic online, which mostly appears correct. So I'm just going through, I'm taking a voltage map, taking readings, checking things out, gathering the data. Because as we know, I don't use a multimeter, I never check stuff. So I've never heard of one. I'm telling you now, this thing smells hot. So we'll get a bias reading. There's definitely an aroma coming from this amplifier, a hot, something's a bit spicy aroma, right? So we'll see where we get. I've currently got it connected to, not to my dummy load, but to, got my speaker switched in so I can hear the amp. We'll take the controls, see what's what. Customer wants me to check the volume control on it and also the effects loop, which we'll do. As you can see, clearly it's had some work in the past. The suspicion is that it did go back to matamp for some service work or an update or something along those lines. So that's where we are with it, but I've got very little data on it and I want to get this thing, obviously, as good as can be. So the best way to do that is to start with the basics and get some measurements. So the way I like to do things, we look at the schematic here. Let's start with our B plus rail. We've got a bridge rectifier here, and then we've got a totem pole configuration here, although which is two 200 microfarad caps. Then we've got a HT fuse. Then we've got a choke. Then we've got this secondary arrangement for the screens, which probably the screens, I would say. Yeah, point B up here. Yeah, let's see. So we're just going to go ahead, even though it's got voltages written on here, we're going to go through and take those voltages ourselves, and then we know. So measuring to ground, and so we'll find the top of those totem poles. So coming off the bridge rectifier, which is be this point here. Oh, that's fun. 400, we're looking up here, by the way, 489 volts. So at point A, 489 volts. Although I'm not entirely convinced. Hold on a minute, but this is the correct schematic. We'll go with it for the time being, all right? We'll go with it for the time being. God, those EL34s are hot. Right, so then we've got the screen supply, which will be, this says it should be some 33 microfarad caps, which if these two cans are the totem pole, then it's got to be these two, right? 486, sounds about right. Then probably this one is next. 446. But this says there should be 16 microfarads, and these are 47s. So let me check this one. 427. I might look online to see if there is alternative schematic for this. And this one is a 396. Now on here it should be 386, so that position there is about 10 volts higher than you would expect it to be, and that's fine. Right, let's do the output valves then. So we've got cathodes are tied directly to ground. So let's find pin 1, 2, 3. Plate voltage. 488 on that side, and then on this side 488. Screens, so pin 4. 479 on this side, 478 on this one, 478, 479. Grid voltage, so the bias voltage applied to pin 5. Negative 42.6, negative 42.6, negative 42.9, negative 42.9. So at least each pair in the half is correct. And this says it should be negative 41. Okay. So negative 42.6. So that's the operating conditions of the output valves. We'll use the CompuBias to work out the bias. Right, okay, so let's turn some pots then, shall we? So we've got that bass boost, which is you see it's a stepped pot. We've got another step pot here, which is called drive. Then we've got bass, treble. We've got presence and volume. So let's turn the volume pot first. Don't hear much. Let's turn the drive up first. Bass up, treble up, presence up. I'm going to put the microphone up against the speaker. Okay, so we've definitely got some noisy controls there. Do you remember, I think before Christmas, we did squirt some cleaner into all of them. So they might end up needing changing out. I mean, the condition of these, a bit of rust on them, so who knows what they're like inside, right? Okay, but that's where we are. Let's go to our load. So we switch the internal speaker mic bench cab off, connect my dummy load. Let's get our signal generator going. Let's inject into the front end. Is there a high-low? We'll go to input 1. Right. So I've got drive on full, treble on 0, bass on 0, presence on 0. Bring the master up. There we go. Oh, it's got some power. Big jump there, look, between. I think that pot is dead. Oh dear. It's very dirty. This is all pot tracking. I'm just turning it slightly and it's jumping. And we keep going with it. Right, so behave, come on. For 100 watts, clean into 8 ohms, we need 20 volts RMS. We've got 28, which puts us at, oh no, hold on a minute, tell a lie, that's 50 watts. For 100 watts, we need, or 28 volts puts us at 98 watts. Okay, sorry, first time back. It's a very dirty pot, so we get, I think that pot needs a better clean. But it's doing roughly 100 watts. Let's get the old service on it, give it another good spritz. I think that pot is dead. Just jumps around too much, look. So we're going to need a new volume pot. In fact, just by tapping the front of the control, jumps around. Okay, all right, bring you down. Okay, so that's that. The volume pot should be, looking at the schematic, 1 meg. Okay, I'm going to pull that off. Can I trace it through? I'm going to stick something new, stick a replacement in there and see if we can get that back, because it just jumps around too much. I guess we could try stripping it apart and having a look inside, but to be honest with you, for the cost of the pot versus the labour time, I think maybe we just swap that pot out. There it is. That one on the end there. This one. So I can turn it ever so slightly and it just jumps. It's definitely a knackered pot, right? Okay, so that's the next thing. That's the first thing I want to fix. Before we go any further, is we'll do the volume pot. He did question it. He did say to me, check the volume. So we need to do that. But we are getting roughly 100 watts out of it. We do need to do a proper bias calculation. We need to get that pot swapped. Right, I know this is a digital zoom, and I'm really, really sorry, but the grub screw in there is just gone. It's not coming loose. I think someone's had a go before and chewed it up. I've had some penetrating oil down there. Can't really do much with heat because this obviously melt the plastic. So I think we might end up having to drill that out, because I can't get that pot out any other way. I don't think so anyway. And we definitely need to. So yeah, been trying for about 20 minutes now just to try and get a flat head on it, but it's just too rusty, too gone. So I'll keep working on it. I will get it off, but I do have replacement grub screws. That's the important bit, so I can replace the grub screw once I've got the pot off, but I don't think I'm saving that. Right, the knob is off, and that was somewhat of an ordeal. So the way you do it, and I'll show you on this one, is you just find whatever drill bit fits perfectly into the hole as snug as you can, and then what you do is you just run that down as true as you can, and it just gives you a tiny, tiny pilot hole that's obviously going to be in the centre of the hole because the bit's not going to wander. Then with a smaller bit, you can drill through down, get more of a pilot hole, and then go back to your original bit and drill it out. And I did that with this one, just to the point where it's starting to come through. I haven't completely drilled the grub out, but just to the point where it releases the tension. And then what I do is I've got these tools here. This tool here, it's actually an automotive trim tool, and that just slides underneath the pot, and you can do that, and it just provides that pressure from underneath, nice even pressure, and eventually it just released a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of heat from a heat gun, not a lot, tiny, tiny, tiny bit, and luckily that came off. Now, the pot isn't damaged as such. I can re-tap that and put a new grub screw in, so we haven't ruined the pot, which is good news. Sorry, the knob. We haven't ruined the knob. Right, let's get this unsoldered and out the way and put a new one in. Where are my pliers? Right, so just to let you know, the wire these two black wires, the one at the front goes to the wiper. So front wiper, remember front wiper. It's a shielded cable, by the way. And both shields go to lug 3. Right. Let's get my nut driver. Okay, and there's your pot. 1 meg log. Okay. So 1 meg logs. Nice CTS dimple back. That'll do. A longer shaft on that one. I'll have to get another nut. Lock washer, flat washer, nut. Solder. Just tin that slightly. Come in. Both of those on. Right, what did I say? Front was wiper, wasn't it? Front was wiper. Tidy up. Volume on 0. Discharge cable off. Let's put you on the scope. Off. Restriction mode on. Fire the amp up. And there's our output. No jumping on the pot, look. Woo! So, pointer clipping is there. Back it down so it's clean. That's probably maximum there. Presence control. Treble control. Feels awful. Bass pot. Multi-step drive. That's your voicing switch. Maximum clean, at the moment, I'd say is there. 32.8 into 8 ohms. Well, 33 gives us 136 watts. 32.5 gives us 132. Well, let's call it 32, shall we? Which is 128 watts. Wow, that's healthy. From a pair of EL34s, good for you. Although I suspect it is biased. Incredibly hot. What do we need for 100 watts? Did we say about 28 volts, didn't we? Back it down a bit. There you go. Looks lovely, doesn't it? Right, so that's that problem fixed. Enough for this video, though. But we are finally making good progress on both matamps. Well, that's it then, guys. Thank you very much for watching once again. I'm sorry it was more Q&A than repairs, but I did promise you that it would be quite an in-depth Q&A video this week because we had so much to catch up on. So more repairs and more amp building in Sunday's video. As always, please give this video a thumbs up. Comments and questions down below. Subscribe, hit the notification bell if you haven't already. We are getting really, really close to 7,000 subscribers, which is ridiculous. Anyway, if you're feeling super generous, why not join the channel that these guys have, or buy a t-shirt, or even better, why not order an amp? And I will catch you all at the next one.